Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorgen, here with London Paul. And Paul, there was an interesting story that popped up in regards to the stranded astronauts up there at the space station. They're supposedly supposed to be picked up in February, but in the meantime, the female astronaut, is getting so emaciated because of her time up there. It really is a microcosm of the US's capability and innovation to function in the greater world. Now, we now have a new president-elect. Are things going to change, especially domestically? That's what we're here to discuss. Paul, I want to thank you as always for being a part of the discussion and welcome to the show.
Yes, and likewise, Ken, as ever. So, in this part, we talked previously about the international ramification in a very broad sense. I mean, in a broad sense, we're going to discuss the ramifications domestically. Because, again, there's a lot of euphoria surrounding Trump's election again as US president, and he's going to turn the economy around and make America great again, be the greatest power, in the world, and we're going to have the greatest economy. And this needs an injection of reality into what this actually means and why it's extremely difficult to do this. And this is not something that all people will be particularly pleased to hear, but it's the reality, and we have to deal with reality when it comes to domestic matters in the US. So I think we should start talking about the issue of reindustrializing America. Now, I'm totally in agreement with that. I don't have any problem for the United States to do that, but that is a monumental problem. And why it's difficult is because, in very simplistic terms, the United States has to be able to pay Chinese wages to be able to do so. Now, in order to pay Chinese wages and do so, it would have to blow up its financial system, blow up its economy, blow up the dollar, everything that it stands for, even though it's all in various stages of terminal decline as things are. It would have to sacrifice all of that to make that happen. And the reason it would have to do that is because, in very simple terms, if the China produces a widget for $1, and if the United States puts 100% tariffs on it and it costs $2, okay, forget all import things, just let's keep the math simple. And then says to the American consumer, well, it's now you're going to buy this widget, it'll cost you $2. And the American goes, okay, so what's the alternative? Because the idea of putting tariffs on things, apparently, is it will deter imports into the country and will stimulate this reindustrialization of America. Well, because you don't pay Chinese wages and because the financialization of economies, you're then going to be in a situation where to produce that widget in the United States is going to cost $5. It may cost $10. Now, here's two problems. No one's going to buy the $5 or $10 widget, so you can't export it because everyone will go, well, I'll just buy it from China because it's $1 equivalently. And so that's the number one problem. Then the number two problem is, okay, if you're going to reindustrialize, and let's just look in pure mathematical terms, then we'll go on to the other reasons why it's a huge problem, is if you're going to produce that widget, then you're going to have massive price inflation in the United States. And the chances are anyway, even if it costs $2 to buy from China, consumers are going to go, well, I'm still buying the widget from China. I'm not going to pay $5 for argument's sake to buy the widget in the United States because it's price inflation. You're going to create an environment where everything costs much more. So everyone's going to want higher wages, which causes more price inflation. And that is totally unsustainable. The whole model is not going to be conducive to reindustrializing in the United States. So that's the obvious point with this. Then you get onto the subtleties, which are equally, and in fact, in some ways more important, is if you're going to reindustrialize, then you're going to tell companies based in other parts of the world, like Southeast Asia and China, etc., well, we want you to move your operations back to the United States. And they're going to go, why? Why should we do this? Because we also don't only sell goods to you in the US, we sell to the rest of the global south, and we want to continue to do that. So then the question is, where are you going to put these facilities if they agree to reindustrialize? Then who's going to put all the infrastructure in? Because the United States' infrastructure is absolutely terrible. It's like a third world country. It needs enormous investment. We're talking trillions of dollars. It's going to be needed. So you're going to need to upgrade ports. You're going to have to put railways in, bridges, roads, you name it. And who's going to pay for that? And people go, just print money. You can't just print money. Because again, you're just going to blow the US dollar up. You're going to cause massive inflation and potentially down the risk of hyperinflation, and you end up with Weimar inside the United States. And they're just the obvious challenges that happen straight off. And of course, the other situation is, if for businesses it becomes wholly uncompetitive to be in the United States, they're going to increasingly not want operations in the US. And they're going to, like they have been, where companies are actually shutting down facilities in Western countries or in the United States and actually moving certain or opening up additional operations in China, for example, because it's obviously economically viable for them to do so, and it's the right environment for them to do so. So how do you actually stop that happening? Yes, some industry has been moved back or tried to move back to the US, but it's played with enormous delays, huge costs. So someone says it's $1 billion to do it. By the time it's implemented, it's $2 or $3 billion. We'll do it in 6 months. It takes 6 years. Often there are plans put in place. The plans get scrapped because of over-regulation, etc. Okay, that's something you could argue could be something that can be resolved. But the idea the United States reindustrializes is so fraught with problems. And it is not a simple question of doing so, because the US's cost of living is way in excess of where it should be, because financialization has created an environment where everybody's maxed out on debt. No one can take on board any more credit. We're also in a position where you can't keep paying inflated wages. We've reached the point we've maxed out on wages, and because we can't competitively or productively keep increasing them. But if we don't, people get poorer and poorer because we have an inflationary model. It's a disaster. So these are just the very obvious points why it's an enormous problem for the United States to reindustrialize.
There's something else to take into consideration. The U.S. is unique. The U.S. has an interesting makeup that is relatively unique. It's not the only nation in the world that does this, but we have not just a national own policies. I mean, just take a look at what happened after 2020. California went full bore on the Green New Deal agenda, and they have lost people, they've lost businesses, they've lost tax revenue. It's moved to another location. So you can implement certain policies at the national level, but they can easily be usurped by what happens in the local level of 50 different states, which is why more often than not, I mean, when the Federal Reserve was first created, there were 12 regional banks, and those regional banks had autonomy in their regions to deal with interest rates because, each portion of the country did different things. The Midwest was for the meat packing plant. et cetera, et cetera. Each of those things, well, that's been centralized into the quote unquote New York Fed. And the same thing with federalism at the national level. You can make these policies about taxation and tips and all this, but unless the different states are on board, you're going to have a number of ones that grow prosperity and a number of ones that, just put their, put their butt their heads against the federal government and what the Trump administration wants to do and keep doing things the way they are. All you got to do is look at Governor Newsom, who came out immediately and said he's going to try to find ways to Trump-proof the California economy. So there is such a division when it comes to, not just the people and their ideologies and their beliefs, red versus blue, conservative versus whatever, but it's also different beliefs in regards to the economy, how the U.S. should grow and continue, et cetera. So there are so many domestic issues that cannot be resolved at the national level, that in reality, the central government should be dealing with primarily how it functions as like take banking, for example. When we were industrialized in the 19th century and into the 20th century, Wall Street and the Federal Reserve and the central bank was focused on building the general economy. Now it's completely 90% or greater financialization. They're not lending money to build businesses. They're not lending money to create growth. Corporations are multinational. They have no allegiance to the United States. That's not the same in, say, Russia with Gazprom or China with Huawei. They are international corporations, but they are answerable to the people and the central government of the country that they come from. These multinationals, they don't care whether the United States as a whole or the people of the United States as a whole will fail. We've got to change mindsets entirely. And it's kind of interesting because from the 16th century to really the end of World War II, the West was ruled by mercantilism, protectionism, and the like. Then the neoliberal world came out. We created the World Trade Organization. We created NAFTA, or not NAFTA, but all these things to try to eliminate protectionism and make it a free rein company. Well, that didn't fully work because everybody did look out for themselves. Trump really, with his threats of tariffs, his implementation of certain things, is trying to bring back mercantilism. Well, the world is not the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. It's a much different place at a time when, as Putin and Xi have commented recently, it's a new world order. And the new world order is going to be sovereign countries working together in equal partnership rather than one nation trying to, race to the top against other nations. And with that being aside, you can do all the tariffs and protectionism you want, but as you mentioned, it's not going to bring back jobs. And with the fact that the U.S. is in such high debt levels, we're not getting capital from other countries. As a matter of fact, we're trying to push away. God forbid, China wants to invest in farmland. China wants to invest in robotics or AI and that. It's not allowed anywhere near. And China and most other countries are no longer buying our debt. So if we can't create debt to try to re-stimulate the economy within, there is no choice but to bite the bullet, devalue the dollar, and then try to build it up from the ground up. But at the current rate, you can't modify anything. And I think you and I have talked about this for years. It's beyond the point that somebody can come in and just modify something, modify changes, and get the ship back on the correct course. No, every single institution in America, period, from education, from the legal system, from the financial system, from even something common like marriage and child rearing is so corrupted. You can't make little simple changes and expect things to happen. You almost have to burn it to the ground. And that's where the US is at as Trump enters into office.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make great points. But I mean, and it's worth reiterating the whole problem that the United States is a vast country with different states, different needs. And the one hat fits all just approach just doesn't work for the US. And so it requires radical overhaul of the entire way the country operates. And all, the point you make about debt's extremely important because no one's been buying. Foreigners have not been buying US debt for a decade. I know people think that the data suggests the contrary, but the use of the word foreign buyers is about as reliable as talking about what GDP means. And we're not here to discuss GDP, but they're totally unreliable metrics and they disguise the reality of what's unfolding. So that's a huge problem in of itself because if no one buys US debt, what do you do? Just print money? Well, you can't do that. And then you always come to the point you can devalue the dollar as much as you like. But that's hugely problematic because what that does is, first off, what's going to happen to the cost of your imports in doing it if you're fundamentally import based, which and because you can't reindustrialize in the blink of an eye, you're going to spend at least a decade, maybe longer, and that's something else. US presidential terms of 4 years, and people aren't interested in long-term investment and trying to really just rekindle the United States to be a great nation amongst equals. No one's interested. They go, well, what did you do in 4 years? Well, for me, you did nothing. So you get kicked out. And all those policy decisions, if you can even implement them, are going to just fall by the wayside, assuming that's even a reality, of course, in the process. So devaluing the dollar is not the answer. I mean, and the other problem is the US has this huge fiscal deficit problem. And it's only going to grow. They're just going to have to print more and more money because the fiscal deficit's going to grow and grow and grow. And Trump's talked about he's going to reduce the debt, apparently, whilst not making any reference to how you're going to reduce the fiscal deficit. Oh, and by the way, we're going to have tax cuts. Well, all those things don't stack up. It's impossible to have tax cuts to not and then not absolutely slash your fiscal deficit either. And these are problems that don't add up just by making grandiose claims, in your election before you were elected or part of your manifesto, as we say in the UK, for what you intend doing politically once you're in office or for domestic purposes. So these are not reality. And then it's also you can't inflate debt away when you're running huge fiscal deficits, massive trade deficits. It's just not impossible. And we saw this because we had inflation during the pandemic years. And what happened to the US debt? It just grew and grew. It grew like it's never grown before. So the US has to address a lot of internal problems like that. And okay, if you want to slash government spending, well, slash the defense spending. Don't spend 800 billion a year. Slash it to 100 billion. Well, can you imagine trying to do that? Sensible decision. We don't want to go to war with nations anymore. Let's have a mature adult relationship with the world. You are never going to be allowed to do that as things stand. There'd have to be such a radical change in ideas and attitudes. So again, this is one of those fundamental issues that underpins why making grandiose claims prior to being elected has to stand up to scrutiny. And a simple scrutiny proves that that's not feasible to do that either.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating that a nation like Russia, which has more territory than the United States, can function and even win a conflict with a defense budget of just $60 billion. Well, that's easier to do when you don't have, 800 bases and you are stretched trying to hold a hegemony over the entire world. You hit the nail on the head. If the U.S. would remove its hegemonic agenda, close bases, stop trying to be the policeman of the world, bring, um, you know, cut the government, which is now over 2.5 million employees and is the largest, pretty much baseline of nearly. I mean, consumer spending is still up there, but the government spending is growing of the economy. You start cutting all that stuff. You cut taxes, and then you will start bringing in capital that will start rebuilding the nation over time. But that's the key thing, over time. Anybody who's going to say that they're going to eliminate and change everything overnight, or even in the next 4 years, is lying to you through their teeth. There may be some superficial things that show progress, but as a whole, what we have today has taken 50 plus years, since even more than that, 60 years, going into the late 60s, before Nixon closed the gold window and eradicated Bretton Woods. But going back, the U.S. has had this mindset of welfare and and military obligations throughout the world. And we started out with less than $100 billion of debt. Now we're at 36 trillion, and there's no end in sight to doing that. We've gutted everything industrially in the United States. We're relying upon what? AI and hospitality to be our sole wealth. That's just not going to cut it. So, the expectations are, hopefully there can be a little bit of reprieve for people if he's able to implement these tax cuts. And that's a big if, because he's going to require Congress to do this. He can't just unilaterally do it. People think that, because the Democrats controlled Congress and they allowed the Biden administration to just write executive orders willy-nilly. That's not the way our system is supposed to work, and it's certainly not going to work, with a Republican on office. So take that right out. Trump is going to be able to do a few things, but most of it's going to have to be with Congress, and Congress is going to have to actually want to do it. And, well, you're going to have that continued division until, it's kind of interesting when you take a look at China. China does have its equivalency of states, but they're regions. And you have regional governors. Xi actually was regional governor before he became the head of the country as a whole. They're given autonomy in those regions, but they have to report and they have to follow through with the plans and show productivity to the central government. If not, they're ousted, or, perhaps even worse. Here, we've got these same things going on, but the states and the regions are not held culpable to the actions and the output that they do. So there's so many different things that are pulling against the United States, because we don't have unity as a nation. We have a bunch of fiefdoms that are fighting for their own control and autonomy, while not really looking at the betterment and the whole of the country. So over time, it's kind of interesting. My own philosophy has changed it a little bit economically to what China and Russia do. The integration of government control over important key facets of the economy, while allowing the people as a whole to do their entrepreneurial spirit. Maybe that's something the U.S. has to look at, but it's going to take a lot of years and a lot of mind changing to change this quote unquote corporatism we've morphed into, where, our elected officials are pretty much controlled by the corporations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the point. I mean, there's an awful lot. I mean, I think maybe given how long we've spent, there are a whole bunch of other points, but it's really just something for a discussion another time. But we can list some of them where the challenges is for if Trump seriously wants to change things domestically, and that's all the massive internal corruption that exists and all these lobbyists, I mean, who are just totally dictating policy decisions. This has to end at some point in time or be drastically reduced. So you try and change the entire workings of the Beltway. I mean, that's enormous alone. And that's not something you can resolve in a week or a year or a decade because it's so ingrained. Then you've got all the problems with the legal system, the judiciary. You have the problems with healthcare, with education, with the need for massive infrastructure projects to be built in the United States. And then you need to have far more coherent policies because as you say, there's a lot of states are just working on an individual basis and doing what's right for them, where they need to pool resources and do things and work to the betterment of the entire nation, because some nations are very rich in certain things and very poor in other things, and some nations don't have resources, etc., to the same extent. So these are radical things that need to be changed. And the problem is, it's not just throwing huge amounts of money at it, it's actually getting people in positions to make those changes and actually find ways to reindustrialize, find ways to build trust with the rest of the world, to find investment, for the United States to actually change its education system, because the West, and I'm not trying to be academically a snob about this, but because all academics are important, it's not just about science and technology, but the future is about science and technology revolution. So we need to change our education system. Well, to do that in the United States, for example, it takes a generation to change that, because the Chinese have spent a generation or more and changed it. So it's hugely beneficial for them in that regard. So these are enormous challenges. Now, there's no way Trump administration can achieve that in a parliamentary term. So then you have to start questioning, well, how do we implement things for the long-term benefit of the American people? Where's the long-term policy? So I'm not saying you should do this exactly, but China has 5-year, 10-year plans. Where's the long-term plans to change things radically in the United States? Because at the moment, economically, it's being destroyed. Financially, it's a total mess. Societally, the United States has never been more divided. The United States' trust on the world stage has never been worse. So they're all the problems, and that's going to affect things domestically. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you start to delve into the changes that need to happen in the Beltway, the changes in foreign policy, I mean, then you're going to have to radically overhaul the military, the intelligence agencies, and the role they play. And as you say, Ken, if you're going to basically bring everyone home and close 800 military bases, well, okay, what are they then going to do in the process? Well, we need to find ways for people in the United States to do productive things that benefit the nation, and to find ways to end financialization. So you actually have a real economy, an economy that benefits the people, for the people, and not an economy that allegedly has some trickle-down effect, which doesn't work, but is geared around financial institutions who are able to profit. And then when they blow things up, everyone in the United States, I mean, the US taxpayers, has to bail them out ultimately, one way or the other. All these things have to change. So you have to completely overhaul the financial system. All the speculation that goes on in markets has to be radically overhauled. And then the question is, what do you do with the US dollar in the future? How is that going to function as the role it has to play? Because the US can't be a world reserve currency in the future, and it shouldn't be. How do you change this massive trade deficit so it becomes initially far less of a trade deficit? Can the US ever become a trade surplus again? There are so many problems, and you're talking a decade or two for them. Even if everyone was geared to pull together and resolve these problems, excuse me, it's going to take 2 decades probably to achieve that.
Easily, because it's taken 60 years to build this. I mean, some of the basic things, getting people away from this materialism that we've established. People's lifestyle. You make $200,000 a year and you can't afford to live your lifestyle. Two, something simple as eliminate banks and hedge funds from owning single family residences, which will open up more. It'll bring down the price. Something like hold the Fed to its mandates, no longer pumping out all this QE so that investment banks can go ahead and do financialization to the nth degree rather than what they're supposed to do by lending to small business and start building small businesses. There's a lot of little things that can be done, but you're absolutely right. This is something that is decades in the making. It's not going to happen overnight. And the best, I think, honestly, and perhaps this is a good place to close, that Trump can do is to set the groundwork. He's not going to really reap the benefits, but he's going to set the groundwork for the next administration to carry on that work to slowly change the pretty much environment that the United States is, and also the mindset of the people. And then from there, you can open up to being a partner within the rest of the world. Anyway, I think we covered quite a bit.
We did indeed.
There's so much that can be talked about, and we're going to talk about that in podcasts in the future, especially as Trump gets closer and closer to taking over office. Paul, as always, thank you for being a part of this great discussion.
And obviously, likewise.
And to the Sirius Report community, thank you for all your support as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, pass this on to anybody you think would be important. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.